SpinSheet Happy Hour. Glad to be here. Glad you're here with us as well. Um, Obviously, first thing we got to do, thank our sponsor. Thank you very much to Mount Gay Rum for sponsoring yet another episode of SpinSheet Happy Hour. Today's topic, don't be a jerk. Love it. And we'll reveal who our special guest is in just a little bit. But right now, I'm going to bring on our editor and chief extraordinaire in my French accent.
Well done on the French accent, Sharp. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. How are you? How was your week?
You know what? I had a pretty good week. It was rather quiet, So did some paperwork and I'm ready for spring.
I'm ready for spring. I'm usually not that anxious about it, but I think the whole quarantine COVID thing is probably played into, we need an early spring.
Yeah, well, and the ice age that we lived in for 2 weeks there certainly made everybody a little more stir crazy. So anyway, I'm having a little light Mount Gay and ginger over here. So cheers.
Cool. Cheers. I'm doing actually the same. Hey, ching.
Woo! Great minds think alike. So I wanted to give a little background on how we came up with "Don't Be a Jerk."
Okay, shoot.
I think it was Duncan. I think it was Duncan Hood when he was on the program. He was saying something. He's like, well, you just want to teach all people, don't be a jerk. We could have a whole program on that. And I said, yeah, we can have a whole program on that. So I wrote it on my list and it made it on there this month. Now, when coming up with a picture for the promo materials, what do?
Yeah.
You put in a picture of your ex or someone you know is a jerk on the race course, which that's not very nice. Or you just put up a picture of SpinSheet production manager's cat. So thank you, Zach. Thank you, Zach, for lending us the picture of your cat, Rigby, at the vet.
Yeah, that's what cracks me up is this is something he just grabbed off the internet. That is his cat.
Oh, yeah. That's Rigby. And Rigby has a reputation for being a little bit of an a-hole. And so that's like a typical picture of Rigby. And we used that years ago. Nick Hayes wrote an article on no yelling. And we used that picture. And it's funny the way that our minds work when we're putting magazines together over the years. I put one line in there to Zach saying, you still that picture of your cat at the vet? That's all I had to say. And within a minute, this picture.
What are you talking about? It's my screensaver on my phone.
Exactly where. Nick wrote that article 9 years ago, and we still have a picture of Rigby. And Rigby is still among the living, and Rigby's still crabby.
That's awesome. Well, we were joking about this before we came on, but who is our special guest? Who's the first person you thought of? You're like, hey, let's do a show about not being a jerk.
Don't be a jerk. Hey, I think I'll invite Kristen Berry from Gale Force Sailing. And we can see Kristen's take. Hi, KB. Welcome back to SpinSheet Happy Hour.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It's funny. When you first called and invited me to this, I was so flattered to be invited back to the show, and then I sat with it for a minute. And I thought, well, why am I uniquely qualified to talk about this? I shared that story with my wife, and she texted me just a little while ago. She said, "Hey, when you're done with your jerk lessons," and she said, "I'm so glad you're finally teaching something you're uniquely qualified to offer." So here we are.
Well, the thing I like about Erin is she seems to know you really well, and she sticks around.
Unbelievable, yeah.
There's something about her. I think she might love you.
It's not for the money, that's for sure.
We don't have any other.
And Scott, of course, I'm wearing Mount Gay red. I was going to wear my Mount Gay jacket, but it's my Mount Gay jacket's a little warm, and it's kind of warm in here. So instead, I stuck to the red sweater, and it's close enough. So, Sharp, are you going to go into the green room here?
I am. And, all kidding aside, KB, it's nice to have you back. But just notice you were the only guest we need.
Yeah.
Nobody else. Full hour. It's all you.
All right. Thank you.
All right, you guys. We'll see you at last call.
Thank you. And
Thanks,
thank you
Chris.
guys. Thanks to our audience member for showing up again for SpinSheet Happy Hour. You know, you can always put a question into the comments. We expect your smart aleck remarks, but feel free to ask questions too, because we do have, you know, we have an expert on the topic. So, Kristen, for anyone who might not know you and doesn't know your history, can you give us just a quick history of your sailing background, the type of sailing you do now, and the type of coaching you do now?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm a Midwestern-born sailor from Indiana. Originally grew up sailing around the Chicago area. Came out here to Annapolis in the 90s, and have been a full-time professional sailing educator since 2006. And I worked in campaigns and elections and politics prior to that. Don't hold that against me, but that's where I learned all my jerkiness from, I think. Yeah. And I worked with J-World in Annapolis. I worked with the U.S. Naval Academy. I've got my company, Gale Force Sailing, and I recently took on a role as a sailmaker with Ullman Sails in Annapolis. So, you know, my space, my niche in the sailing world is education. I love teaching sailing. I love teaching sailors of all types and varieties. As you can tell, I'm in a hotel room right now because I'm actually down in Florida putting on a clinic at the St. Petersburg Yacht Club this weekend for some Florida-based sailors. And yeah, that's sort of me in a nutshell.
All right, that's good. Thank you. And it was funny when you've been on the program at least twice, right? I can't remember the topics anymore, but we do know that you're comfortable on camera. And I know from years of you've done Start Sailing Now, or you've been on a panel for Start Sailing Now. And so I know you're quick off the top of your head and you have a sense of humor. So honestly, that's why I chose you. You can tell your wife it's not because you're kind of a jerk. When I called you and said, hey, will you want to be on the show? And you said, oh, that's one of my favorite topics.
Well, yeah, I mean, my mom said I had a face for radio, but I do love doing these chats and really enjoy answering all of your questions, Molly. So bring it on.
Well, cool. So you and I, we had some time on the phone to brainstorm a little bit to come up with questions here. And I liked one of the very first things you said was, you know, all jokes aside about being a jerk, you know, most times when someone ends up being a jerk, it's actually unintentional.
Totally.
And you mentioned a little something about, you know, sort of start at the beginning, start with the dock. Just walk down the dock. And I liked what you had to say about that because I think there's real truth in it. It's just start everything off.
Yeah, you know, it's one of those things where sailing is in a weird space, I think, because has historically been a real community based kind of activity. But in these weird times, we've used it as a socially distant activity. But you don't have to be socially distant or emotionally distant, I don't think. So I think sailors could do a better job of starting at the dock and getting to know their dock mates, getting to know their neighbors, and being friendly as they're wandering up and down the dock. And sometimes, you know, you got your arms full of fenders or dock lines or the weekend's provisions or whatever, and you're in a hurry to get to your boat. But circling back and stopping by anybody that you pass along the way to introduce yourself or say hello goes a long way to, you know, setting the tone of your dock and helping dissuade people of the idea that maybe you're the jerk because you were in a hurry on your way to and fro, you know?
Yeah. Well, I have two things to say on that. One of them is I still remember running into an acquaintance on the dock. He said, hey, I didn't recognize him. I think because he had a beard and I wasn't used to seeing him with a beard. And I didn't know he had a boat. I was just sort of disoriented, but I stopped and chatted with him. And I learned a lot about him in a short, like 2-minute chat, maybe. And he said, hey, just so you know, my wife and I keep our paddle boards down there on the rack. Like, feel free to use them anytime. We don't use them that often. There are paddles there too. You're welcome to use them. And if they're there, you're welcome to use them anytime. I remember walking away thinking, it was sort of disorienting. It was so like, oh, he's like a real boat guy. Like, oh, you're on the dock all the time. Feel free to use my paddleboard. And it was such a nice thing. I was so glad I stopped. And I never use this paddleboard because I have my own, but it was such a neighborly offer. Yeah.
And, look, I think I learned this lesson most acutely. I lived in Mears Marina way back when, 1997 to 1999, on my Catalina 27. What a cramped, damp lifestyle that was. But in that marina, there were several other people who were liveaboards, and it was really important to be a community because inevitably somebody needed something. And oftentimes it was me. And knowing who you could go knock on the bow of their boat or who would be home or who wouldn't was really important. We also were sort of the caretakers of the marina when other folks who would travel back to Pennsylvania or back to DC or whatever were away. And we created a community where if somebody's dock lines were amiss or their halyard had gone afoul or it looked like they were sitting a little low in the water, we would be able to get on the horn and call and help out. So I think, right then and there, it's a good idea to not be a jerk and build some community. But most importantly, it was a winter night and, probably January. And I heard this muffled sound coming from outside the boat. And one of my dockmates had slipped off the dock and fallen in the water.
Oh my God.
And I, too often I think today it feels like we might just figure it's the wind in the rigging kind of thing. But because we had a community, I felt obligated really to poke my head out of the hatch and see what was going on. And I'm glad that I did because I was able to help that woman out of the water. So, really important to not be a jerk because you might be the person in the water someday. You don't want people to feel like they have a choice of whether they're going to come and help.
Yeah. Now, I have a couple of friends who are liveaboards who might have a slightly different take on someone saying hi to them every time they walking down the dock. And I think that brings to a point situational awareness. So if you're a liveaboard, you're going up and down the dock a number of times a day. And, sometimes you're on your way to the restroom. You don't really want to say hi to everyone every time. But I think that there's a way of walking past someone and knowing like those two are in the middle of dinner right now. It might not be the best time to stop and chat. Or someone might be reading a book and you can give them a simple nod. And they will probably let you know with their body language how ready they are to engage with you. But I think a lot of people on a nice day, if they're just hanging out on deck, like they're there to be at the marina and they're happy to talk sailing, right?
Yeah, we didn't really talk about this in our pre-briefing about this, but there's something that you're touching on that's really important, and it's important across sailing in general, which is using nonverbal cues and situational awareness. When I'm coaching new sailors, we often talk about having your situational awareness inside the lifelines. That's where you get it first. And then starting to move it further and further out. You can look across the bay and know if you have a crossing situation with a boat that's far away because there's a constant bearing and decreasing range. You can look at a cloud and know whether it's coming. Great mariners, great sailors, great boat people of all types have that situational awareness. Well, we can have that person to person as well. And then, if you think about really good sailing teams, whether we're talking about husband and wife cruising teams, we're talking high performing racing teams, they use nonverbal cues all the time. Think about the bow person up on the bow of a large, on a Navy, one of the Navy's TP-52s. The bow person can't communicate with the helms person. Right. She's got to be able to give a thumbs up, 2 boat lengths, 1 boat length, whatever the case may be. And I think we can do that as we're walking down the dock too, sort of the, all good. And then if somebody wants to engage, they're going to take the bait and say something back. But just assuming that somebody's ready to chat is probably asking too much. That's where you might be the jerk on it inadvertently,
Yeah. Well, before we sort of travel out into the creek and talk about what happens out on the water, let's talk about the fuel dock. Fuel dock. I mean, who hasn't been cut off at the fuel dock? So, I know you have some tips for avoiding fuel dock etiquette snafus. And
I do. And, the first one is, and I think that whether you're a sailboat, powerboat, whatever, we got to remember why we're doing this. This is supposed to be the most fun we can have at 6 miles an hour. And it should be relaxing and it should not be a tense experience. So I think in those situations at the fuel dock in particular, I tend to be really deferential. And I think that's a good place to start. But then a lot of this comes down to communication. So, getting comfortable communicating with another boat, finding a way to hail them appropriately and make eye contact, that sort of stuff, I think is really important. Get close enough to be able to verbally communicate without shouting is really important. And we should all be carrying our VHF radios. And so, there's a lot of different tools that we can use to communicate either with the fuel dock staff or with the other boats to figure out kind of what the queue is, where you fit in that queue, and how to navigate that. Then on top of that, I think that when I witness, when I worked at J-World, we were right across the creek from probably one of the busiest fuel docks in Annapolis. It's a busy one. And there's a lot of traffic that isn't going to the fuel dock that complicates things. So I saw some pretty, what in hindsight are pretty humorous situations develop there. And, oftentimes I could see what was going to happen because there was a person who was uncomfortable with maybe holding their boat on station, standing still. Most of us are pretty good at going in a straight line, and our boats maneuver the way we anticipate when we're going 4 knots, 5 knots, 6 knots. But the really skilled sailors are the ones who can do what they want to do really down speed. And when I teach close quarters boat handling, I always talk about slow is pro. And if you can come to the dock at 4 knots, I want to see you come to the dock at 1.4 knots. And be just as successful putting the boat where it needs to be. And rarely is more power the answer. And at the fuel dock scenarios, I think being a bully is a good way to be labeled a jerk. Most of us put our boat names on our boat, and people remember that. Another thing about the fuel dock is thinking about how you interact with the fuel dock staff. And I think that that's really important as well. Whether or not you've got a tipping policy, that's up to you personally. I tip, and sometimes when I'm working with clients who don't tip, I go over and slip the tip over there because I know I'm going to be back at that fuel dock soon. But more importantly, it's just about being, courteous to those folks. They work really hard. They're there to help you, and they've seen this situation before. So it's worth asking, if it's a tricky scenario and you're not sure how to approach the dock, ask for some advice. But again, I think open lines of communication there. If you want to put your boat on the dock with no help, if you don't feel comfortable communicating which spring line you want to come on first or taking line from them, make sure you communicate that before you get into the situation where voices can get raised and temperatures can rise. And I think people appreciate that. But there's a lot of action at the fuel dock for sure. I've been cut off many times. I'm certain I have inadvertently cut people off myself. And when it happens, I feel pretty bad about it. So that's a good place to think about not being a jerk.
Cutting in front of boats, waiting patiently for a spot at the fuel dock. Yeah, that's Eric's pet peeve. And I actually remember really well that happening one time with a guy I only knew from the racing community. And when he did cut in front of us and we went, he just came from nowhere and cut in front of us, and we'd been waiting patiently, and then he knew it, and he turned in front of us, and he said something like he had to meet his mother for lunch. Wait, you just gave him as an excuse for cutting us off. That just didn't make him less of a jerk. It actually made him a little bit like one because he knew what he was doing, but.
I don't know if you guys have noticed, but we've got a nice list of pet peeves going on in the comments section. So if you want to rattle through them,
you want to go ahead and put them up. Let's talk about them.
Some of them are pretty good. First of all, I'm just going to bring this one up because it's completely irrelevant. But someone's pet peeve is you cheating at gin rummy.
Well, I don't know what Dale's talking about, but
I've never met Dale. Yeah,
right? I will tell you, I did have a client of mine who's a Catholic priest once cheat at life-size Jenga on Norman Island, and that one still sticks with me. So, and I think Dale might have been on that trip with us too, so he'll appreciate
running your engine at the dock for forever to warm them up. Ugh. I'm with you on that, Greg.
Actually, Greg, that's kind of a good point. In general, especially if you're running a diesel engine, that's not good for the engine either. So. It's not good for the environment. It's not good for your neighbors, and it's not good for the engine. So that's a strong one.
And our good friend Wally about pulling up to the dinghy dock.
Yeah, so I saw this in the chat, and I wanted to unpack this a little bit. So this can go either way. I don't know if Wally is saying that 6 feet is too long or too short, but this is sort of the Goldilocks problem of being a jerk. Is that it can go either way. A painter that is miles and miles long can lead to some tangled props and some other issues. But one that is too short means that fewer boats can actually get to the dinghy dock. So, and this may change island to island potentially. But I tell you what, if you tie up on a short painter in Dominica, your dinghy may not be there when you get back because you took up some real estate that 3 or 4 other boats wanted to use. So that's a tough one. And actually, and before we leave that too, I think a lot of us are looking at getting back into chartering and getting back to the Caribbean. I've got a friend of mine who's down in the islands right now who says that there's like nobody in the BVI, and for good reason, understandably. But when we do start going back, not being a jerk includes paying attention, being socially aware of what local customs are, and if you're unsure, ask. Most folks will give you some good advice, and maybe don't just ask once, ask several people to make sure you're getting the best advice possible.
Mm-hmm.
And here's a touchy subject or a smelly one. I was just curious. Obviously, there's etiquette there, but don't cut in front of people and all that kind of stuff. But I don't know, is there some special things there not to be a jerk?
Well, I think so. I mean, probably jerk number one thing is not using your holding tank and pumping straight overboard. And there's still a lot of boats that are doing that. So, and that's a pretty jerky thing for all of us, including future generations. So people should make sure that they're using their holding tank. But I think, if you're going to get a pump out, and especially if it's a crowded Saturday or something like that, I mean, everybody's entitled to get their pump out, but be prepared. What that means is make sure that you've got the appropriate key to open the pump out through cap on the deck cap, fill cap. Make sure that you've got the cleanup materials that you need so that you can get in, do your business, and get out of there while other people are waiting. And so, I think preparedness is really important. If you're going to go to the fuel dock, you ought to have your oil zorb ready. You ought to have the key that you're going to need to be able to open the fill cap and try to be as efficient as possible.
Yeah, and have your credit card in your pocket. And bring beer if you're a guest. Thank you, Don.
Yeah, Don, I think that's a great point, and I'm just making sure that everybody sees it. So there's no question about it.
Yeah.
All right, I think we can go back.
Okay, good. Well, let's talk. Let's go out of the creek and out into the water. And we were talking about. You had mentioned, all the comings and goings out of a busy harbor. You were saying Annapolis Harbor, but it really applies to any busy harbor where boats are coming in and out. Let's talk about some crossing situations there. There's a lot of jerk potential. And for anyone who's just turning in, we're talking about not being a jerk while on a sailboat. And so let's talk about busy harbors.
Yeah, I think if you're a chronic texter and driver, you might also be a jerk in the harbor. If you're not looking around and anticipating what could happen next, if you're traveling at high speeds and not necessarily whatever is the posted speed, but an appropriate speed for the harbor if it's busy, that's pretty jerky. I think not establishing some form of connection with the boats that you may be crossing with, not knowing what the standard rules of the road are, those are all things that set you up to be a jerk. And sometimes you're owning it, right? You're not just inadvertently, you're complicit in your jerkiness there. And we see this in Annapolis all the time. If you're standing on the dock at SSA and you're watching the boats go by 1SC into the harbor, it doesn't take long for you to witness something that is pretty darn jerky. And sometimes that's because people weren't paying attention, but oftentimes it's just because they don't know any better, or sometimes it's because they're a jerk and they think they ought to be able to get where they want to go. So, how you throw off a wake matters a lot. And sailboats in particular, I think we tend to think, oh, we don't throw off any wakes, we can go wherever we want, but that's just not true. Another great place to see that, if you're at Jabin's or you go up, stand at the little fishing dock there at the Watergate Village, and you watch folks that are in Upper Back Creek, they're putting the pedal down, but they're throwing a fairly healthy wake. There's lots of kayakers and paddleboarders up there. That makes it difficult on those folks. And in some cases, you're actually breaking the rules of where you are there. So I think people need to be really cognizant of that, and they need to think about it. The biggest jerk stuff that happens though in the harbor is just not recognizing that there's a crossing situation, and then not doing something to sort of deconflict that or reconcile that situation. One of the things that I tend to do when I'm coming into a busy harbor is I actually take my sunglasses off. And one of the reasons that I do that is so I can make eye contact with the other boaters. They know that I'm looking right at them. And, taking my glasses off for a few seconds to make sure that I've got a good established kind of line of communication is important. And then if there's any doubt about what's about to happen, what do you do in your car? You pump the brakes. And as boaters, and maybe it's because of the speeds that we travel at, but we just don't use neutral or reverse enough in some of those situations. And it's just sort of this slow collision point where things get weird or get to a place where they can't be rectified. When you could have slowed down 30 seconds, 60 seconds before that, and just let the situation play through, and then carry on. Even if you are late for your mother-in-law's birthday party or what have you.
Yeah, right. Well, and I think too that, and we might be getting into this in a little while, but I also think that as a crew member, I have actually said before, is there any reason we're going this fast right now?
Yeah.
Under power, going into a busy, narrow creek. Just why can't we slow it down a notch so that we can continue to see what we're getting ourselves into? I sort of feel like sometimes people think, they put the throttle where they feel comfortable with it and just keep it there as if slowing down just a little bit isn't an option. Or
and with the folks that I often work with professionally as a sailing teacher, I've seen the kind of the human psychology of that is that they feel most comfortable when the boat seems to be most in control, which there's a certain speed for. And the way that I talk about this is I use the acronym MCS, which is minimum control speed. What is the slowest that you can travel and still make the boat do exactly what you want it to do? And that speed is generally below even slow idle. So to be at MCS, you have to be pulsing. So you're in gear, maybe at 5 count. You're in neutral, 5 count. You're in gear. You're pulsing along to have MCS. That's where that slow is pro concept comes into play. If you're just even throttled all the way down and in forward, you get cooking along pretty good in some of these boats these days. So, I think you're onto something there, and folks really ought to take it upon themselves to, especially as spring rolls around and we're getting back into our boats, get comfortable maneuvering your boat at the slowest speed you can. Now, MCS changes as the conditions change. So if it's blowing 25 knots, you are going to need to be above your slow idle speed to maintain MCS. But hey, it's the Chesapeake Bay. We don't get that opportunity very often. So
yeah, I hear you. Well, I like what you have to say too about making eye contact with other boats, because sometimes it's just as simple as saying, "Where are you guys going? We're headed here. Is that cool?
Right.
All right. Or thanks, or go ahead. You guys can go."
Yeah, and I think the wave through
the race course, we're not. You go ahead.
The deferential wave through is really, really important. I saw somebody in the comments talking about we've been circling around for a while. There is a point where you need not be a shrinking violet, but you want to make sure that you get in where you fit in. What I mean by that is that if you felt aggrieved by the last guy, that doesn't mean you get to take it out on the next guy. So that's situational awareness. That's controlling your emotions. That's understanding what's going on. That's communication. Hey, that's good boating is what that is.
Yeah. Well, it does seem a good season to brush up on the sort of basic rules of the road, where you have rights and where you don't. And, any thoughts on that?
Well, sure.
You did mention something about VHF as well.
Yeah,
using that a little bit more often.
Yeah. So, a couple of different things about that. One, I get the itch to do two things every spring. One is to read Old Man in the Sea again. And the second is to retake the Maryland Safe Boaters exam. And you can find the free version of that online. I think Boat US may have a version of it. Maryland DNR has a version of it. And it just doesn't take that long to go back through that. And every now and then you'll read something that'll surprise you or catch you off guard. You'll read the rules about children under the age of 13 and who has to have a life jacket on and who can be where on the boat, stuff that maybe you've forgotten or just don't think about. And so I think it's worth it, especially in the age of we're all on Zoom calls and that sort of thing anymore. These are interactive online tests. It's worth taking one of those and just use it to sort of mentally tune up your brain a little bit. The next thing is that I do believe that cell phones, to some degree, have reduced our comfort level with using our VHF radio. And cell phones are they're amazing tools. I use them all the time. I use them all the time on the water. But VHF radios are still the most powerful communication tool we've got when we're out on the water for being able to hail and communicate. So, one, I think you should be listening to your VHF radio. I know there's a lot of chatter on some of the channels, but if you learn how to use your VHF radio, you learn how to tune it properly. That stuff sort of just becomes background noise. And then it's there and ready when somebody's trying to hail you and communicate that way. So I'd like to see us have a renaissance of VHF communication. And I think it's really cool. If you're taking new people sailing, something that you can do to really make somebody feel important on the boat and to do so in a meaningful way is to have them handle the handheld VHF radio. They may not need to be your communicator, but you need somebody who's listening. Now you've divided up. You're the one who's looking around. You're controlling the boat. You're focused on that. Somebody else is tuned in those sort of high traffic scenarios. So it's a really easy way to make everybody feel like they're contributing to the team. That person who's new, sometimes that can make them feel safe because they're connected to this device. So big fan of folks getting comfortable using the VHF radio.
I agree. A couple of years ago, the Boat Foundation, the Boat US Foundation came up with an online course called All About Marine Radio. And, when you're with the sailing press, every once in a while, you get something like a free code to try something. And I thought, they have half-hour-long class on VHF radio. And I plugged in my free code and I listened to it and thought, oh, my gosh, I just learned like 4 things I didn't know.
Yeah.
So I always tell people about that course because it's out there. All you do is Google Boat US, All About Marine Radio, and it costs $30.
Yep.
And it's really an interesting online class, and you'll get something out of it, and then you'll be excited to use your VHF again because you
That's right.
You got it down, But
I saw
for
that
emergency situations, it's really critical that you understand what you're going to do.
Absolutely. I see Stephen Birchfield in the comments there asked a question about shouting, and I think that this is important because it actually relates to the VHF radio too. Is that there is a good way to communicate outside and a bad way to communicate outside, and there's a good way to communicate on the VHF radio and a bad way to communicate on the VHF radio. So we'll start with the shouting side of things. I think some folks have a good outside voice where they can increase the volume without necessarily increasing the intensity of their voice. And that's something you might want to think about working on. If you think you might have a shouty outside voice, don't hesitate to say thank you and please in the statement. Because I think that there can be some unintentional jerkiness that comes out of somebody yelling at you. They're just trying to get your attention or they're just trying to communicate, but it feels like they're yelling at you. Then the next thing I would say is make sure that when you need to get your voice at somebody, that you are projecting at them. I've seen a lot of folks who start to say something and then they come back and they're like, I can't believe you didn't hear me. And then finally, I would say, I tend to wear my life jacket, my PFD all the time when I'm on a boat. It's just sort of my suit of armor. I feel really comfortable. It's got all the stuff that I like to wear. And on that PFD is a Fox 40 whistle. And you'd be surprised how quickly you can get someone's attention with 2 quick little toots on the whistle. It's not a common sound. It's not sometimes horns, people just look past them these days. But the sharpness, the shrillness of that whistle, I think is really good. And you can aim that whistle just like you can aim your voice, so that you can get somebody's attention without really having to wail on it. So something to think about. When it comes to VHF radio, learning the challenge with VHF is that it's simplex communication, right? You can't hear what you're saying, and they can't communicate at the same time. It's not a two-way call, essentially. Mm-hmm. So with that in mind, I think it's worthwhile making sure that you get yourself into a position where there isn't wind noise or engine noise that steps on the VHF signal, and learn how to use your radio to the best effect. We used to have an automated VHF radio callback system in Annapolis. I don't think it's online anymore, but that was a great tool for being able to do a radio check and also hear exactly what you sound like. And if there was any, feedback or disturbance in it, you knew it right away.
I didn't know they didn't have that anymore.
Yeah, in fact, if they're usually on channel 27 or 28. Many times they're run by CTO, and they're all over the country. So you just go and you key the mic and you say, radio check. And then what happens is normally there's a little commercial message that comes back. And then what happens is they play your sound right back to you. So you get to hear what you sounded like, which is just an awesome way of checking out the radio. I have thought from my own company, what a great way to kind of get, Gale Force Sailing out there is taking on that automated radio check, but haven't gotten around to it yet.
Yeah. So when we did our little brainstorm session, you mentioned something that resonated with me about the Stinkpotters versus Blowboaters battle that goes out there. And can you explain to the audience what you explained to me? Because it meant something to me, especially because we went from being just a sailing magazine to a sailing magazine and a powerboat magazine, and now we have a fishing magazine. And we have come to find that it's really, really important for everyone to get along.
Yeah.
Well, and actually see each other as fellow mariners, right?
We are. Look, I don't believe that the Blowboat versus Stinkpot schism is real. It is if we perpetuate it, but there's no reason for it to exist. And in fact, we should be actively working against it, conspiring against that division in our boating. And the same thing goes for the incredible increase in human-powered boat traffic too, kayaks, paddleboards, that sort of stuff. It's everybody's water. We need to share the water and understand that we're all trying to enjoy it. And so we need to be respectful. We need to understand one another. We need to, you see a paddleboarder who's struggling to go upwind on a windy day. You need to kind of think about what they're going through. And as power boaters, they need to think about sailboaters. We didn't put engines on the boats at J-World, so we were oftentimes sailing up Back Creek, and that was challenging for us. Then you add some traffic in there, and I've had more than a handful of powerboaters yell at me, "Use your motor, no sailing in the channel." Well, that's not actually the rule, but it showed me that they didn't understand what was going on in that situation. And there were many times when I was managing my staff where I would stand at the McNasby's dock and watch them push a bad scenario. I'd take them behind our woodshed when they got back to the dock, where I said, "What would it have cost you? 2 minutes, 5 minutes to jibe out of that situation, spend another minute waiting for that bottleneck of traffic to pass through, and then come up the creek and not cause such an issue?" So, that type of mentality, I think we all need to share. Now, the challenges that are working against us, we almost all boat on a schedule. And so we're in a hurry to get back to the dock, to get back to whatever it is that we've got to get to, or our own skill level isn't where it should be because we haven't been able to put in enough time. And so we push things. If you're feeling tense, you should be looking for a place to pause and exit, because you're going to be less of a jerk if you're comfortable.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you said that about paddle boarders. I mean, paddle boarders, it's become a problem in Annapolis, and I paddleboard all the time. And so I try to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. But I have been with other paddle boarders in situations where I realize they don't know what I know. And so, I have said, hey, you gotta move closer here. It's just the smarter thing to do right now, that we're in a busy channel here, and it's not a good time for you to lollygag in the channel. So, come over here. And I realized that it's okay for me to educate other people if I do it the right way. Just like you taking your colleagues aside and saying, would it have killed you to drive?
Right.
And let the situation pass. And I think sometimes that gets lost when we're mad out there. And, I mean, I've been also on the sailboat with a sea of paddleboarders or kayakers coming at you, and clearly they haven't been given any instruction at all. And they're la, 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 la. And you are thinking, oh my gosh, are they ever going to get out of our, do they realize, we're on a boat?
Yeah.
They don't. And the answer is no. A lot of times they don't. They've been rented the boat. They don't know what they're doing. So.
Yeah, and I don't want to jump the segue here, but look, there's some places the paddleboarders go that a sailboat that draws 5 or 6 feet can't. So they never the two shall meet in some cases. And the same thing goes for when we're out in the bay. There's a lot of water that you can sail and boat in where you would never ever meet a commercial vessel or a tanker or a tug or a barge. And there's a lot of bay that you can enjoy without ever seeing those big boats and having to interact with them. Use it. And if you do need to cross the channel, whether you're on a paddleboard or you're on a boat, a sailboat crossing the main shipping channel, do so expeditiously. There's no need to lollygag in those places.
Yep.
My grandpa used to say to me that that the squirrel that goes down the middle of the road, something about flat squirrels in the middle of the road, yellow lines and flat squirrels. Well, the same sort of thing about paddle boarders in Back Creek, get to the edge, please.
Yeah, I know. And it's tough. But I do think that there are a lot, as a paddler, there are a lot of situations where you have a boat coming at you that it's very easy for you to say, hey, I'm actually going right here. So hold your course. I'm cool. And they're like, you could tell they're like, oh, okay. She knows what we're doing. She knows we're coming into this alleyway or, whatever they might be doing. So I think that applies on sailboats too. So let's go back to sailboats out on the water.
Mm-hmm.
And talk about some onboard jerky situations. There are situations where you could be a jerk to your own crew, or your crew could be jerks to you or your other crew members. And we talked a few of those on the phone. Can you maybe give us a couple of examples on how to avoid those situations?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I see this all the time. I work with teams that are trying to get better, trying to go sailing. Someone, has made an incredible investment to put that boat at that dock on that day. And so I think it is really important that the crew recognize that and, be appreciative of the investment that has happened in order for them to be able to go boating or sailing that day. At the same time, I think the boat owners need to recognize that while they've made that investment, they did that for themselves, and that the crew that are coming along deserve their respect and appreciation too, because they're giving up their day to come out and go sailing. You look down Back Creek, you look down Spot Creek, you look through Harrington Harbor, it's like an aluminum forest. Many of those boats do not go sailing. Why not? Well, I think it's because it's hard to pull together a group of people to go out and do that activity. It's harder and harder with the way that we use our time. So because of that, we really need to understand that this is a partnership and be respectful of one another in that partnership. I know that's a bit of a soapbox statement, and I can be a little preachy about that, but I think it's really true. You mentioned Mr. Hayes talking, he wrote a great book about saving sailing and mentions a really incredible fact, which goes something along the lines of, in 1975, a third of Americans went on the water, and at that time, most of them were sailing, went on the water at least once a year. And that number is now down around 3%. That's a shocking number. And the sport is declining. There's no doubt about that. But we can turn that around by inviting more people sailing, so this doesn't become a self-fulfilling prophecy, and supporting one another out there on the water. So a lot of folks are just inadvertently jerky because they either as a boat owner or as the skipper of the boat, they get a bit of a God complex. They think it's their boat, they know it all, and not recognizing that they probably wouldn't be able to do it the way they want unless those folks that were on board with them were willing to come. And it can go the other way too, where the crew can think to themselves, well, she wouldn't be able to get this boat out of the slip without me. So what am I, why do I have to be deferential here? Well, because you do. And I think that that's really important. And just, the next thing I will say is this, is understanding that jerkiness or perceived jerkiness is usually driven by anxieties. So most people are jerks around the dock. I wonder why that is. Most people are jerks in high tension scenarios. I wonder why that is. And it's because they, I know that some of the skippers that I work with, I can hear it in their voice when they become nervous, and they have just been awesome educators for the last 10 minutes, but now we're about to do a maneuver and suddenly they become a little sharp. And the reason for it is because they're afraid they might hurt somebody and they don't want that to happen. They're bumping up against their own skill level or their own knowledge level. And so they don't want something bad to happen. But being sharp, yelling at the crew, just doesn't make it any better. Right. So that's a pretty good sign that, you need to do a little more practice, seek a little more knowledge, get out there and keep working on it.
And really lots of expectation setting, right?
I think so.
I think of one crew. I stepped on the boat. I'd never sailed with them before, and we were doing the Solomon's race then back when it was an overnighter. And I just remember they just had it going on. I stepped on the boat and I was told, this is the crew boss. She's the one you listen to. This is going to be your job. You can listen to the mast man if he tells you what to do, but she's the boss. And I mean, they just told me how it was going to go. And they were great. They just set the expectations so well is what they needed me to do. And they made it easy on me. I didn't have to guess. I didn't have to read anybody's mind.
I listened in on the CBYRA call last night where John Tahansky was talking about sort of the much of the process that they use at the Naval Academy and the Varsity Offshore Sailing Team. John's my mentor. I learned how to sail from John, essentially. I mean, I learned how to coach sailing for sure from John.
And he's been on the SpinSheet Happy Hour. He's a great guest too.
Amazing teacher, amazing sailor. And he reminded me last night of something that I've used at Navy. They teach us at Navy. I learned it from John when I was coaching at J-World, is, this sort of pre-briefing that doesn't take very long, 3 to 5 minutes. I think you guys featured it maybe in SpinSheet Magazine recently about how to have a crew briefing. But one of the most important things that comes out of that crew briefing is identifying who's the OIC, who's the officer in charge. And that can shift. That's your style, but knowing who to turn to, knowing who you need to be listening to first and foremost, puts a lot of people at ease and also sets the hierarchy that, I bet we've all been on a boat where somebody said, don't tell me what to do. I'm waiting for so-and-so to tell me what to do. Mm-hmm. And, and I, as a coach, have had to put my hand on the shoulder of an owner and say, there's only one coach on this boat right now, and it's really important to understand that that's, again, I think it's almost always well-intentioned. You're trying to help somebody or you're trying not to get somebody hurt. But you got to recognize if that's causing you anxiety and therefore causing you to change the way you communicate.
Yeah. And I think that something really simple is saying, it's supposed to get windy out there today. And sometimes when the wind level goes up, the voice level goes up, and I'm not yelling at you guys, but I do need to be heard. This is a little bit of a segue. Can we talk a little bit about yelling? I see that Stephen, by the way, Stephen Birchfield is a SpinSheet regular. Yelling happens. Saying sorry after a race or cruise with a drink is always called for. Thank you, Stephen. I agree. Stephen is a SpinSheet Century Club member, as is his young son. So he gets out there, and I think he knows what he's talking about at this point. So let's talk a little bit about raised voices on boats. It's a stereotype that's sometimes well-deserved, right?
Yeah, I guess I would. I don't want to be contrarian here, but I've been watching the America's Cup that's been taking place. They're wearing mics and they're whispering to one another. There's no yelling taking place on those boats. And on the most high performing teams that I've worked with, there's no yelling taking place. And that's high performing, not just on the race course, but in the cruising world as well. I'm working with a team, husband and wife team, that are in Key West right now. And when we started, there was a lot of yelling going on, and there's no more yelling like that. And so for them, if they have to yell, they sort of use that as the indicator that they need to debrief and figure out what triggered that to have to be the reaction. Now, do we need to elevate our voices from time to time? Heck yeah. So we can be heard and so that we can communicate. But I think that there's a subtle difference between increasing the volume and yelling. So if there's yelling going on, I think you gotta talk it out afterwards. And as Stephen said, best way to do that is probably with in the shade with a drink, maybe in the air conditioning, while let cooler heads prevail, and be real honest about it. What led to it, and then how can you go about fixing that? So that's just one coach's opinion on that.
Everybody's funny in the comments tonight. Seth still says, good recommendation, Kristen. We all need mics.
Yeah, throat mics would be, yeah.
Brian says, we're not yelling, we're motivating.
There you go. Just what we need is more gadgets on boats, right?
Yeah. So is there any part of the Kristen Berry jerkiness prevention program that we have not covered yet here? We're getting close to last call. And so just want to say that I know you have jerkiness prevention things that we might not have yet covered.
Oh gosh, I should have made my list. I think all good boating takes place in the future, not in the present. And what I mean by that is that if you're anticipatory, if you are anticipating what's going to happen next, so when the time comes to make the action happen, you execute rather than try to develop a plan on the fly, you always perform better. And that includes running what-if scenarios and having both a plan A and a plan B. So the very best way to not be a jerk is to have that fundamental seamanship skill, that forehandedness, that anticipation of knowing what's going to happen next and being prepared for it. And if you are, unless you are a jerk at your very core, I think you'll avoid most of your jerkiness.
Mm-hmm. I love it. Did you, if we could sneak in one more minute, did you want to get on your soapbox at all about racing?
Well, yeah, I do a lot of sailboat racing, and I'm a lover of the rules. And one of the things that breaks my heart is to see or hear people adjudicating a rule situation that happened last year or last week or yesterday. And more often than I care to think about, I think people get X'd off of people's holiday cards list because of some subtle infraction that took place during the sailboat race. And so it really bums me out when that happens. So 2 ways to fix that. The first is to, if somebody feels aggrieved on the race course, take your penalty. It is not an admission of guilt. It's insurance against disqualification. And it provides you with the moral high ground that you need to be able to discuss that situation down the road. I just want to see more sailors, taking that penalty turn when they get when it's clear that somebody feels like something bad happened, and recognize that you do not need to hear the word protest to know that you fouled. So that's my soapbox.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah.
I like it. If you wouldn't mind, I know that there were some comments we didn't quite get to after the program. Sure. When you have a chance, if you want to go through, if there are any that we haven't addressed, if you could give an answer there, and
I'll do it.
So for anyone who is just tuning in, this is Kristen Berry from Gale Force Sailing, and
Annapolis's biggest jerk
for the SpinSheet Happy Hour. Thank you.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed the program, and I hope you'll have me back. And if you won't, I'm going to be a big jerk about it.
Yeah, I know. I see that Mark Burrows chimed in. He's like, sorry, I'm late. Jerk move. Come on, Mark. You show up every week and you're late. We were counting on you. And I do see that a guy by the name of Don Burnett has put up some really good tips for being a good crew member. So maybe everybody can go through and read the comments and remember to show up early and pitch in when you're a crew member and maybe be a good listener and help clean up at the end of the day and know the rules. So anyway, that's all I have for tonight. I hope everybody has a great weekend. I know that Sharp has a few words to say about Mount Gay before we sign off, but I would just say thank you, KB. Awesome to have you as a guest. And to all of you who are listening, I love that you guys are still showing up for our program. And I hope you have a great weekend. It's almost spring.
Woohoo!
Sharp, you're muted.
Molly, how are we going to know it's spring without the sock burning?
Well, I guess we're all just going to have to do that in our backyards.
Yeah.
They say that the first sock burning actually was like one guy in a paint tray with a Budweiser. So it was supposed to be a quiet little thing at your marina, not a big to-do. So we'll go for this year. We'll go back to the roots.
Awesome.
And, well, we seem to have lost Sharp. Are you back?
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. Okay. Now we can go.
Yeah. Sorry, guys. I did want to comment just a couple things to everybody who joined in. First of all, of course, thank you, KB and Molly. This was great, actually. And I really did enjoy the comments. We did not get to all of them. One of the cool things about what we do right now is we stream to both YouTube and Facebook. And the only problem with that is that depending on which one you're tuning in by, you don't see all the comments. You only see Facebook comments or you only see YouTube. Anyway, that kind of, it doesn't let you really see the traffic that we're seeing up here. So we don't get to everything. So I apologize. And in addition to that, yeah, it's just crazy. Anyway,
well, and we're going to be here every Friday night in March. And so next Friday night, we are going to talk about sailing with veterans with the guys from Valhalla Sailing Project.
Yes, that's going to be very cool.
If you want to see what else is coming up, just go to spinsheet.com and click on the calendar, or you just go find it in our March issue, which came out yesterday.
Yeah,
so,
and of course, stay tuned. The best way to see what's coming up is, and just to kind of stay informed with SpinSheet is through our Facebook page. But we are always throwing up the new videos and stuff like that on the YouTube channel as well. So please subscribe to Facebook and like our Facebook page. Very cool. Well, thanks, guys. I'm going to throw you in the green room real quick. Stick around for the infamous party in the green room.
After party.
See, I keep doing this. Anyway, you guys are gone now. Goodbye. Anyway, thanks for tuning in, folks. And again, I do need to give a quick thank you very much to Mount Gay Rum. They have been our sponsor for a while now, and we really are appreciative of it. But of course, we're totally psyched that you guys keep tuning in. It really is kind of amazing. By the way, if you have any, if you have topics that you think even if you think we probably have already thought of it, please send it our way because we may not have. So let us know what you guys want to see on the program, and maybe even some special guests and things like that, because we're always open to inviting whoever the hell wants to join us. So anyway, until the next time, thanks again, and be